Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vietor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben, the New England Patriots are in the playoffs.
Yeah, but not exactly with a huge head of momentum, my friend.
Yeah.
Losing to the Dolphins twice.
Oh, you don't think it's good to lose the Dolphins twice and then
yeah.
roll back into Buffalo, where it's just kick the shit out of us?
And very cold.
Yeah, we need it to be like either negative 50 in driving winds, or it's going to be tough.
Yeah. The negative 15 driving winds could play to your advantage.
That we need.
Last time you only ran the ball, right?
Yes. I think Mac threw the ball 3 times. But anyway, the listeners hate the sports banter.
Our global listeners love our discussion of American football.
We apologize. We have a great show today. It's a fun, ranging, interesting set of topics, in my opinion. We're going to start in Kazakhstan because there have been protests which seemed like they turned into proxy fighting, and then there were more Russian troop movements.
Crazy story, yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
We'll also cover some more trouble for British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
It's worth it, this one.
This one's worth it. How Canada is trying to ban bigotry. Some news out of Ethiopia, some COVID news, an interesting update out of Haiti about the assassination of the former president, how a tennis star is causing a major diplomatic incident in Australia.
This is huge, yeah.
And then we'll check in with Jair Bolsonaro and Mike Pompeo, see how they're doing, learn about an amazing North Korean invention, and celebrate a heroic rat. Let's go to Kazakhstan, Ben, because like we mentioned at the top, I mean, this week or so, it's been a week plus, basically. We've seen huge protests, deadly street fighting, security forces shooting live ammo at protesters, and then finally this Russian military intervention. Here's what we know. So on January 1st or 2nd, the government of Kazakhstan lifted price caps on liquefied petroleum gas. That is the fuel that most Kazakhs use in their cars. This set off a now familiar set of protests over prices, economic inequality, corruption, like general anger at the government. Kazakhstan is the 9th biggest country in the world. It's got tons of oil and gas and mining resources and a small population, but it's been ruled by a bunch of corrupt autocrats, well, one in particular, since becoming an independent state after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, and people were just pissed about their, economic lot in life. But here's where the story gets more complicated, seemingly. The protest had started in western Kazakhstan, and then they spread around sort of the region organically. But analysts think that, literally 1,000 miles to the east, the fighting in the capital, Almaty, turned into something different. It was like a proxy fight between the current and former president with gangs and armed groups sort of on both sides that were heavily, heavily armed. Nursultan Nazarbayev, who's the former president, he ruled Kazakhstan from 1991 until 2019 when he handed over the reins to the current leader, President Tokayev. But even after leaving the presidency, Nazarbayev retained a lot of power and influence as the head of Kazakhstan's Security Council, which left him in control of the security services. So that was the case in the sort of political dynamic of, the former leader still kind of running the show to some extent until last week when, in the middle of the protests, Tokayev made a power play, announced he'd be taking over Nazarbayev's position leading the Security Council. Then he fired and arrested the head of Kazakhstan's intelligence agency, who was also a former prime minister. So it was a big-time power play. Tokayev then declared that the protesters in the streets were foreign-trained terrorists, and he asked this regional security organization led by Russia called the Collective Security and Treaty Organization for Assistance, fun name, and Putin rolled in, the troops and tanks. So Almaty, the capital, was literally a war zone. Like, there's all these videos of constant machine gun fire, heavy fighting. The mayor's office, the presidential palace were attacked and burned. I saw some reports of up to 8,000 arrests, thousands more people seeking medical help. It's hard to know the truth because the internet keeps getting cut off, but there's also reports that Nazarbayev fled the country. So, Ben, a lot of context there, but historically, Kazakhstan has tried to straddle the West and the East, right? Like the Russians and the U.S. and China and Europe. In one fell swoop, they went all in with Russia. What did you make with Secretary of State? What did you make of Secretary of State Tony Blinken's comment that, quote, "One lesson of recent history is that once Russians are in your house, it's sometimes very difficult to get them to leave."
So this is a fascinating story. And actually, I like that quote from Tony because, sometimes you don't see Tony's actually a really funny guy.
Yeah.
And it's good to see the Tony. That's
what
he would say if you're sitting here with us.
Right.
So that was good. Okay, where to start with this? So Nazarbayev has been, the autocrat of Kazakhstan since its independence from the Soviet Union, and kind of held Kazakhstan up as the success of like the stands. You know, they were making all this money, but they were largely doing it in oil and gas. And
not stands like the kids say.
Yeah.
Stands like the regional.
Like Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and and so they had this kind of gleaming capital city with these high-rise buildings, and they had the fold-out ads in The Economist, and they had like the international conferences, and it was to some extent a higher standard of living success story. But Nazarbayev also just phenomenally corrupt.
Yeah,
I mean,
like billions
just billions, because what happens is, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, they kind of auction off these oil fields and these natural resources, and Nazarbayev got control of them. He's probably has untold billions of dollars. His kids have billions of dollars. And so the deal was essentially, things are going to be stable here. Standard of living is going to go up a bit, but me and my family and my buddies are going to get phenomenally wealthy, right?
And everyone else, you shut up.
Yeah, you all shut up. He kind of got too old to run the place, handed it off to the new guy, but importantly, kept his kids kind of in the mix too, right? So there's like a Nazarbayev clan that is still very influential in Kazakh politics. And then Tokayev, the new president, was kind of seen as like the guy who would do the bidding and keep the shop running, right?
It just for the listener, we'll probably have edited this, but Ben and I were both kind of struggling to think of his name.
Yeah.
This literally happened to Putin at a press conference last month with Tokayev. They were talking, and he couldn't remember the guy's name.
Couldn't remember the guy's name, right? So this guy's not exactly. And by the way, they were renaming the capital city of Almaty after Nazarbayev. They were trying to create a kind of cult of personality that would sustain itself. Then, clearly, these protests were legit at the outset, right? Like, you had people who are just pissed. Nothing's going to piss people off more than raising fuel prices. And oh, by the way, an oil-rich country in which all the oligarchs become billionaires off of oil and gas, but they still have to raise the price for me to like heat my house or drive my fucking car. So people were pissed, and they're pissed about corruption, all the things that you detailed. It does feel like in the kind of chaos of these protests, and people are like, smashing up buildings and kind of going after government buildings, it feels like there then became this power play between Tokayev, the new guy, and seeing this as an opportunity to dislodge the influence of Nazarbayev. Mm-hmm. And to do that, though, he makes himself essentially Putin's stooge.
Yep.
So his play is to say, okay, I'm going to appeal to like the Russian version of NATO, which is essentially a collection of former Soviet republics that don't mind having Russia be the shot caller in this kind of sphere of influence for Russia. We're going to ask these troops to roll in. We are going to crack down viciously. I mean, really, just shooting people live fire in the streets. And on the back end of that, what's going to emerge? It's going to be this president who was kind of a technocratic type of autocrat suddenly is the strong man, but he's a strong man who's more beholden to Putin than even before.
Yeah.
Nazarbayev can maybe take his billions and just kind of get out of the picture and hope that things calm down. It feels like that's the play we just saw run, and it's not, unfortunately, that unfamiliar. Belarus, for instance, comes to mind.
Yeah, it seemed like Tokayev was trying to sell sort of a softer, gentler autocrat image, but then shit goes down, these protests start. He starts to think that Nazarbayev is sending, sort of gang members and sort of militia forces to foment violence. So he calls in Putin, and you're right, now he's a completely weakened autocrat.
Yeah, what we don't know is what was kind of going on behind the scenes between the Tokayev and the Nazarbayev people, but it just does feel like Tokayev took the opportunity to basically align himself with Putin and try to smash some of the influence of Nazarbayev in response to whatever play the Nazarbayev people might have been running.
Yeah, fascinating. So I read you that Tony Blinken quote. The Russian Foreign Ministry's response was, quote, "If Antony Blinken loves history lessons so much, then he should take the following into account. When Americans are in your house, it can be difficult to stay alive and not be robbed or raped." yikes. It sounds like Tony's comment got under their skin. So, Ben, I think like every analyst I've read seems to think that like Russia is coming away the winner here. They have more influence in Kazakhstan than they did before. At least they have a leader who like owes Putin a pretty big favor. I guess the question I'm seeing a lot of people ask and argue both ways is, do you think this will have any impact on Putin's calculus when it comes to Ukraine? Like, is it more likely to make him want to invade? Is it less likely? Do you have a take on that?
Well, I think if you just step back from all of this, and I do this later with Alexei a little bit, but, you know, it is very hard to look at the current situation generally and not feel like, oh, Putin has all this momentum, right? He's got like 100,000 troops bearing down on Ukraine. He's got, you know, Lukashenko is kind of his toady in Belarus, and now he's got Tokayev in Kazakhstan inviting some Russian troops in to kill some people in his country. You can invert this, though, and wait a second. Like, in the places where Putin wants to have maximum influence, there's a lot of seething instability running underneath the hood of the car.
That's true.
So in Belarus, clearly the people don't like Lukashenko anymore, and he's kind of lost whatever legitimacy he might have once had. Clearly in Kazakhstan, where there's not a lot of insight from the international community because it's fairly cut off, underneath the hood there, people seem pretty pissed. I mean, that was pretty clear. And so, and overall, Russia is not, it's not like this super rich country. It's this kind of hollowed out place where young people are leaving. So there's one narrative where Putin's on the march and he's got more influence as these former Soviet republics and he's demanding that the U.S. negotiate with him about NATO. But on the other hand, he's got fires popping up all along his borders in places where people are sick of kleptocracy and autocracy. He's got a minuscule GDP compared to Europe and the United States. Mm-hmm. He's got young people leaving the country. And so the question is, in the short term, he can really drive events, right? Because he could just decide, say, to invade Ukraine in the same way he just decided to send some troops into Kazakhstan. But in the long run, he doesn't have like that good cards, both in terms of just the relative strength of Russia economically, but also just in terms of like people wanting to live under Putinism, right?
Yeah, and just being overextended.
Yeah,
too.
just being overextended. I think people should be cautious about. I don't know that Russia is going to have to deploy mass amounts of troops away from Ukraine into Kazakhstan.
No, I think it was like 2,500, and it sounds like they're already coming out.
It feels like they're already coming out. So it feels like they busted some heads, shot some people, and came back out. So, but if anything, I think it does heighten the stakes that like what is happening, and this we cover with Alexei later, but what's happening in Ukraine and all these places is really Putin just trying to push democracy out away from any bordering state, you know? And I'm going to be the force that I'm basically the security force that bust heads in all these places. And the question is that going to prevail, or can people's aspirations to have a better deal going to ultimately cause the lid to blow off all these places?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, I guess it's a good question. We shouldn't necessarily assume it's one or the other. The thing that does suck is for like, you know, activists, protesters, civil society members in Kazakhstan who had this legitimate moment that started and kind of gets subsumed in this proxy fighting seemingly, and then the Russian intervention. Like that part's tough.
Tokayev had some insane, like I think he said something like there were 20,000 foreign terrorists.
Yeah, he made up.
I mean,
They
just total bullshit, right?
Same bullshit.
I mean, you watch the videos, it's worth, and some of them are wild, right? There's people on horseback, there's dudes walking around with 2x4s, but like it clearly there's popular unrest, you know, in this country. And, you know, they can say all they want about foreign they don't care to even be credible anymore in their conspiracy theories.
No, they don't try at all. Okay, let's turn to the UK, because there's a different kind of political instability that Boris Johnson is dealing with that he created for himself. A leaked email shows that one of Boris Johnson's top aides invited more than 100 staffers to a BYOB garden party at number 10 Downing Street in May of 2020. So this is during the height of the early pandemic and lockdowns.
May of 2020.
May of 2020. A 100-person rager. It was like a wedding.
Yeah.
This news was broken by ITV News. They saw a copy of this email. It was from the Prime Minister's Principal Private Secretary, Martin Reynolds. Fun title. Apparently about 30 to 40 staffers actually showed up, including the Prime Minister and his wife. Less than an hour before the party, Ben, Johnson's Culture Secretary was doing a daily COVID press briefing. And he told everyone the following quote: "You can meet one person outside of your household in an outdoor public place, provided that you stay 2 meters apart." So those were the rules for the people not CC'd on that email, and then the rest were at a garden party. This is not an isolated incident, as we know. We talked about similar reports of parties, gatherings by Johnson's staff, some of them at number 10 Downing Street, right? There was the holiday party during the lockdown, and then the leaked video. Johnson's press staff, like, joking about how to lie about it. Johnson had initially asked a cabinet secretary to lead an investigation into these incidents because, he clearly wants to get to the bottom of what happened. But the person he asked to lead the investigation had to step aside because he knew about the garden party, apparently. Now there's calls for Johnson himself to be questioned as part of this broader inquiry. The Metropolitan Police are looking into it. Ben, I'm going to ask you to predict the future, which is dumb, but why not speculate? He's a political survivor, right, Boris Johnson? But, like, I don't know, this one just feels... This one feels so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone can understand. Like, I don't know that Labor is ready to capitalize. That's always the problem. The elections might not be for a while, but this is such an easy story to understand. One set of rules for me, another set for you.
Yeah. I mean, so the basic problem they have is that they want to live by a different set of rules and have BYOB ragers at the height of COVID. The other is that they continue to lie about it. Right?
Lie.
So they keep getting caught, like, directly in the lie. It's like, well, I didn't know anything about this. Oh, like, well, here's the email from your guy, like, sending out
to 100
the
people
thing for the rager. And part of the problem with their lying and covering up here too is that, like, there were, like, hundreds of people, like, involved in this. Like, it's not hard for someone to be like, oh, wait a second, actually, I have the email where you invited me to the BYOB rager at number 10 Downing Street.
And he fired and humiliated his top guy, this guy Dominic Cummings, a while ago, who's clearly just leaking everything he's got on a vendetta.
Yeah, and so this is going to continue. I'm sure there's more parties. I'm sure there are more emails. You just have that feeling that there's a very large iceberg across underneath the Boris Johnson Titanic here. Now, why might the case for Boris Johnson's survival? He is a politician whose central insight is if you feel no shame about anything, you can survive anything. It's kind of like Trump's insight that if you cannot be shamed, you won't resign, you'll just weather it, and people's attention spans will move on to the next thing. The problem is it's pretty clear that, like, this is really dragging down his approval ratings. You saw, we mentioned recent by-election, local election, where they lost, like, a serious Tory seat. And so there is the makings of a real electoral reckoning, not just in a general election, which doesn't need to happen until 2024, but in every election on the way to that. And so if Johnson himself doesn't resign, do the Tories just toss him overboard? Because they're like, we don't want to go into the next election tethered to this guy who's kind of lost the public, right? I'm not going to predict the future because I don't see Boris Johnson as a resigning type,
No, I don't either.
So my suspicion is he'll try to weather this, and I don't know enough whether the Tories will make a decision that ultimately they don't want this guy as the frontman anymore. But it's a very weird thing that he was so insistent on partying through COVID, though.
It's just like, it's such an easy thing to not do.
Yeah.
So he got it. He nearly died.
Yeah. He nearly died. You'd think that would have had a sobering, pardon the pun, effect on the guy.
I mean, that might have been after this. I don't know when that happens in the timeline here, but Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah.
And he had a baby during, there's so many reasons he shouldn't be at a garden party with 30 or 40 people in the height of COVID.
Why he felt so compelled to do this is kind of the part of the mystery here, But I do think it he's in real political danger, and there's a real opportunity for Labor to make this a bigger case than just the COVID thing itself.
Totally.
That the disrespect that this demonstrates is manifest in a lot of the government's policies and choices. That essentially, if Boris Johnson's slogan around Brexit was famously "Take back control," like, it's time for the people of the United Kingdom to take back control from Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Because he has no fucking respect for them, right? So if I'm Labor, I'm focused on, yes, demanding he step down, demanding inquiries, but building this into a larger argument about this conservative party has sold itself out and sold out
illegal
voters.
lobbying by conservatives, et cetera. Another story I saw, the Queen of England recently announced a list of folks who will be knighted It included former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. That is a huge honor in the UK to become a knight. That's probably an obvious point. But people are a little shocked, a little angry, a little surprised that Blair was on there given his role in the Iraq War. And some folks quickly organized a petition calling for the knighthood to be revoked, and it received over 1 million signatures in less than a week. I would say clearly, like the U.S., the U.K., none of us had the full reckoning for the Iraq War that we probably need, but like not knighting a guy who helped precipitate it seems like an early step. But to the question about whether Labour's ready to step in and fight the other side of these fights, Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, was out there saying that yes, Tony Blair does deserve to be knighted. So I'm not sure that's the position I would have taken here.
I think you have two problems here. One is like the Iraq piece, but the other piece is that Tony Blair's gotten a lot of negative press over there for his post-prime ministership life, which basically jumped into bed with a bunch of oligarchs and autocrats and his kind of blend of consulting and philanthropy and the rest of it. The problem for Labour is you've got the Blair legacy that is complicated by Iraq and this kind of whiff of corruption, and then you've got the Corbyn legacy of this kind of hard left turn that didn't work out with these anti-Semitism issues that had to be addressed. And so what is the foundation you're standing upon? Yeah. You almost have to kind of rebrand this entire endeavor in a way.
Feels familiar.
But if I'm Keir Starmer, like I'm sure what he's thinking is I need those Blair voters back.
That's true. That's true. Those sort of moderate Blair. And he's also sort of making a technical case. Well, he was the prime minister. He did this for that for the UK, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know. I would sort of check out the 1 million people signing petitions saying no knighthood for the guy and kind of read the room. Okay, here's a good news story, Ben. So last week, a Canadian law banning conversion therapy went into effect. Conversion therapy is this snake oil treatment that is supposed to help convert gay people to straight. It's nonsense. It's bullshit. It's usually abusive. The law will make it a crime to offer or promote services that are intended to change someone's sexual orientation. The law will also make it illegal for Canadians to take minors abroad to get conversion therapy, so you can't drive your kid to somewhere in the U.S. and do it. The bill passed Canada's House of Commons and Senate by unanimous consent back in early December. Some conservatives now say they were confused by that process and wouldn't have voted for it, but whatever. Way to do your job well, guys. But a dozen countries have passed laws to protect citizens from conversion therapy, including 20 states in the U.S. and Washington, D.C. So good for you, Canada. Hopefully the U.S. maybe will get our act together and pass a federal law too. But, lead the way up north.
Yeah, I mean, and there have been a bunch of these issues where Canada's been, a laboratory for, more progressive policies. I mean, they've been very good on gender issues internationally. And look, I think on the LGBT issues, part of what we've seen is a lot of resistance in a lot of places. But what you also see is once you start making headway, like in this country, it changed very fast, So things that seemed like impossible, like gay marriage, suddenly are very normal now. So the hope is that if you have other countries kind of creating a template for what the right set of laws are, that you have a vehicle that can be expanded as the movement for LGBT rights globalizes.
Yeah. Some interesting news out of Ethiopia. So recently the government said it would release a handful of political prisoners in a step towards resolving the civil war in Ethiopia that's been raging for a year, 15 months actually. This seems hopeful, Ben, but I don't know. My hope is a little bit tempered by the fact that previously Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has ruled out talks with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, who are the leaders of the rebel faction that the government has been fighting with over the last year. But, the momentum in this fighting has sort of ebbed and flowed. The New York Times quoted some diplomats and analysts who said that the government's recent military success is because they were supplied with armed drones from the UAE and Turkey. So again, wonderful. But again, there's real urgency here because Ethiopia's security forces have cut off hundreds of thousands of people living in the Tigray province. They're starving to death. It's really an urgent matter. So I don't know what to make of this. I want to see some hopeful news. I want to think there's some sort of process to a resolution. I also have a pretty strong, healthy distrust of anything the Ethiopian government says, but I don't know. I don't know how you read this news.
I mean, I think you have a situation where what may be emerging on the ground is an awareness that neither side can just win this war, right? So that you may have shifts in momentum back and forth, but the idea that the government is going to completely pacify and conquer essentially the Tigray region, that's not going to happen. But also the idea that the TPLF is going to come down and totally conquer Ethiopia, that's not going to happen either. So when you have a situation where both sides may come to that realization, you obviously want to get to a negotiation. These sides hate each other, and so the idea of getting right to the core issues of like how is power shared and is there autonomy in Tigray and these kinds of things, it's hard to start with those kinds of conversations. So what you look for are there kind of confidence building steps, like prisoner releases, that can at least start a pathway into a negotiation about those bigger issues.
Right.
And that's what you would hope, is that there are these kind of underneath the hood, you know, we're probably urging them to do confidence building steps like prisoner releases, right? And so you hope that that's a part of a process that leads somewhere, rather than just like one-offs that disappear into quicksand.
Right, prisoner releases, talks, ceasefires, those sort of the recipe. Ben, quick global COVID update. So the World Health Organization says that half of Europe will have been infected with the Omicron variant of COVID-19 within 6 to 8 weeks. So that's a sobering headline. It's a projection based off 7 million new cases that were reported across Europe in the first week of 2022. So the Omicron is moving from west to east across the continent, kind of like a wave. How bad it will impact various European countries will be determined by, the percentage of the populations in each place that are vaccinated and the strength of their individual healthcare systems. On Monday, Pfizer said they could launch a version of their vaccine tailored for Omicron. Omicron? What are we going with?
I'm an Omicron guy.
Okay, Omicron.
Maybe we can't pronounce on this show. So.
No, historically bad. So, look, the Omicron-specific vaccine in March, good news, maybe a bit late, though. I don't know. The good news, though, is that there's now considerable evidence that this variant leads to less hospitalizations, fewer ICU admissions than the Delta variant. So, obviously the risk is that if so many people get sick, it could overwhelm European health infrastructure. But, Ben, stepping back, like it's we've talked about this most days the past month. Like it's demoralizing, exhausting, frustrating to have COVID like still so front and center in our lives in 2022. You are starting to see some health experts say there could be a best case scenario that is basically this Omicron variant overwhelming Delta variant and other more deadly ones. It moves so quickly and infects people so quickly that we get to some level of herd natural immunity and cases go way down fast. I mean, that's easy for us to say sitting here in the U.S. fully vaccinated, but, it seems like the options are bad and worse. And, long term, maybe Omicron as opposed to Delta there's a silver lining there, but we'll see.
I mean, I guess a few different takes on this. I mean, than what you might normally get from epidemiologist Twitter. First is it feels like that those numbers are higher just because Europe is better at testing than we are.
Probably,
we're probably going to be half infected too. I don't know, but I've been struck by there's just more testing and reporting in some of these European countries. I don't know. That's just my that was my impression of why would there be more of a percentage of cases, positive cases in Europe than here. I think the second thing is that this reinforces that there'll continue to be just these disruptions. So to things like travel and the resumption of tourism, things that are important to Europe's economy, and the function of kind of certain international business and even diplomacy. Which leads to the third thing, which is that what we're also seeing everywhere is that incumbent governments are going to suffer from the reality that people are just fucking pissed off.
Being in charge right now is no good.
And so you could be trying to do everything right. It doesn't matter. You're going to get blamed. Mm-hmm. And people are sick of the disruption more than they are, wanting more lockdowns. And so I have to think that the trajectory of politics is going to be towards, yes, continuing to prioritize things like vaccination, but also trying to figure out a way to live with COVID.
And you're seeing this from Biden's former advisors, for example.
Yeah, you're seeing it from Biden's former advisors. You saw it in the UK. It's how the Johnson government dealt with Omicron. You saw Macron say that his whole strategy was to try to piss off the vaccinated.
That was a weird take.
But I guess he's trying to redirect the rage towards the unvaccinated away from him, which is maybe a one bet. So I think you're going to see people trying to evolve towards a place where you kind of assume Omicron is the new variant and we're going to live with it. The other challenge, though, as we've talked about, is if we don't do more to vaccinate more of the world, you just give the virus more time to mutate into a variant that might be more deadly than Omicron. And so, there's no answer to this that doesn't involve more vaccination in the global south, too.
Totally. We got to ramp up production of those vaccines. Update out of Haiti, Ben. So the New York Times reported that there is new evidence that suggests that Ariel Henry, the current prime minister of Haiti, actually has ties with a prime suspect in the murder of the former president Jovenel Moïse back in July, and that Henry and the killer might remain in touch. That's not very good operational security if you're still calling the killer and you're in charge of the country. So the New York Times saw phone records that show Henry spoke with a guy named Joseph Félix Badillo, who's a former justice minister, who's now suspected of organizing the presidential assassination. It sounds like they spoke before and after the assassination happened, including twice the morning that Moïse was killed. The Times also reported that this former justice minister, Badillo, visited Henry's house when he was being hunted by the police. Obviously, the prime minister's office denies everything, but the Times also interviewed a drug trafficker who says he helped finance and plan the assassination.
Yeah.
That guy tells him that Badillo, this former justice minister, was bragging that he controlled the prime minister's office. So a lot of different threads here showing that there's a connection. Henry has also fired prosecutors who are investigating his role in the case. Everyone should read the full story. It came out on Monday, the 10th. There's lots of details. It's worth reading it. I guess my takeaway, Ben, in question for you was, I guess I'm not really surprised by this, that, this sort of a rival would take out a rival. But I guess where my brain went is I worry that if you have a current prime minister desperately trying to avoid prosecution, stay in power, that increases the risk of violence even more. It also reminded me of the conversation we had back in the day with Lord Marincourt, who's a journalist based out of Haiti, about how it's bad whenever the U.S. tries to sort of dictate Haitian politics and get back a guy like Henry, who now appears to be connected to the murder. But I don't know. What did you take away from this story?
I mean, it felt like very plausible, right? Basically an alliance of political actors and cartels and people that would have an interest in both offing the prime minister and just kind of getting their hands on the levers of whatever political power there is in Haiti. It also made me think that it's a sign that patient and relentless investigative work is important, because some of those early stories were. Remember, there was a doctor in Florida.
Yeah, they're blaming a doctor in Florida. All over the place.
This feels more real, and it does speak to the need for kind of international investigative resources to continue to be put into this, because the idea that the Haitian government's going to get to the bottom of this, kind of doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, it seems like there's in parts of the Haitian government that are leaking things selectively to the Times, to other places,
because they're being suppressed probably by the prime minister, right? And it leads all the way back to where we started on this issue, which is that the political elite in Haiti feels completely compromised from various directions, from gang activity, drug activity, participation potentially in political violence. You could have the very awkward situation where a judgment is made that the current prime minister killed the previous one, right? And I think that all this kind of reinforces what you just alluded to, which is that the U.S. needs to be building relationships and taking the advice of Haitian civil society, of people that are outside of this power game. That the idea of just having another election that can be easily rigged by a bunch of gangs on behalf of some corrupt frontman is not the answer here. It's more long-term, bottom-up building of civil society capacity to have a different kind of politics in Haiti.
Yeah. It's
informed by Haitians, not imposed by us.
Not by us. Okay, let's take a wild swerve and talk some tennis. So Novak Djokovic, Serbian tennis star, has been locked in this brutal, rhetorical, and legal match with the Australian government, and it's a total mess at this point. The backstory is Djokovic flew to Australia last week in advance of the Australian Open. That tournament starts on January 17th. But when he arrived, Australian authorities detained him, they questioned him, and they pulled his visa because Djokovic isn't vaccinated. Australia's COVID rules say that all non-citizens have to be vaccinated, except in certain narrow cases. So Djokovic spent 4 nights quarantined in what they call an immigration hotel. I imagine just like a quarantine place in Melbourne, before finally getting released because the judge said, hey, this guy wasn't actually given enough time to respond to the legal proceedings before getting his visa revoked and tossed in this hotel. Djokovic's team says he recently recovered from COVID. That means he qualifies for an exemption under Australia's rules. Australian authorities say the exemption is only for travelers who had serious illness. I don't really get the distinction there.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a total mess. There's a chance that he could still get deported and miss the entire tournament. So, Ben, there's not like a good guy here.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of good guys in this story.
Yeah, like Djokovic, he seems like he lied on his travel entry form because that requires you to not have traveled for 14 days before arriving in Australia. But like his Instagram shows him both in Spain and in Serbia. So clearly he got that wrong. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is jumped on this incident for political purposes. He wanted to show what a hard ass he is. But his critics now say like, hey, this is a mess because your approach to immigration is be an asshole first, throw people in prison first, and then ask questions and use your brain second. And also, by the way, Australia is dealing with like a big Omicron surge and a shortage of tests. So I don't know, like this is so messy. Do you have a take on, whether he should get to play, whether he should get deported, what could have been done differently? I don't know if you're a big tennis guy to begin with. I'm
a tennis guy. I should start by saying I'm a Nadal guy. I'm a Rafa guy. I'm Team Rafa.
I mean, Djokovic's a dick, right?
Yeah, I mean, the impression has always been he's been kind of a dick. In that you have like Federer, this really classy guy, Nadal, this really fun, exciting guy, and then Djokovic is like, almost like Drago style, like,
He's literally hanging out with war criminals.
Yeah, really good tennis player. I mean, probably the best tennis player of all time, but like, unsavory type, right? But, he had some constructive things to say about the recent China dust up, right? People can surprise you.
Right.
So first of all, like, the fact that he's unvaccinated is annoying. Maybe he and Aaron Rodgers and Kyrie Irving can do a couple shifts at an ICU and see what that's like.
Or of like a 3-on-3 team that could just dominate.
Yeah, because like I have people in my family who are nurses, and they get all these anti-vax people overwhelming the ICU, making their life hell. So why don't you go check that out? Mm-hmm. That would be my solution. Is instead of a quarantine, you had to spend a couple days in an emergency room and see what the consequences is for human beings of people not getting vaccinated.
Scrub up.
Then the Scott Morrison piece of this, because they've completely mishandled this too. Number one, what's kind of weird to me about this is Scott Morrison is a right-wing asshole, but he's picking a fight with the kind of right-wing asshole adjacent anti-vax community, right?
Yeah.
So just from a matter of pure politics,
get it either.
Like, I get that he's flexing his kind of anti-immigrant bona fides, but he's also kind of weirdly picking a fight with his base, right?
Right.
Because I assume that the anti-vax movement in Australia is a right-wing thing too. So the politics are not as obvious to me as they might appear, right?
It would be like Ron DeSantis arresting Ted Nugent at the Miami airport.
Yeah, exactly. No, it'd literally be like Ron DeSantis preventing Aaron Rodgers from playing a Dolphins game because he's not vaccinated.
Yeah.
So that was weird. The other thing is it highlights the fact that they have an incredibly inhumane immigration policy where if you want to look into it, thousands of people have been detained in very inhumane conditions because of their view that that's kind of this deterrent against migration. Scott Morrison used to be the immigration minister.
Yes.
And he was proud of what a dick he was to immigrants, basically. And now they're treating Djokovic like that. And so now he's tied himself in this knot where the way they're treating Djokovic is actually highlighting this other problem that they have. If Djokovic gets the release and able to play, then there's a double standard. How come this rich tennis player gets to be let out and gets exemptions from your laws, but all these other people don't? And so that leads me to the very last point, which is why they allowed this to get into a situation where it feels like the prime minister of the country is making this decision.
That's
like,
the sketchy part.
That's what the tennis tour, like the men's tennis tour, should have their own rules about whether you need to be vaccinated or not, right? Presumably, or the letter of the law should just be followed as to what exemptions he might or might not have, and just take it out of politics and let the machinery of the tour and the local authorities be the ultimate judgment here. Instead, it's kind of become this thing where it feels like it's a decision being made by the prime minister, and that to me is bizarre.
Yeah, what it seems like could have happened is, like, I think Djokovic might have landed at like 4:30 in the morning, 5 a.m. He gets interviewed right away. They tell him, okay, you have like 12 hours to make your case, get all your documents together. Some judge literally says, I think it's in a transcript, and the judge leaves the room for a minute, comes back in, and is like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Now you only have until 6:30 a.m. or 8:30 a.m.
It made
right?
Djokovic sympathetic,
yes,
because it was like, wait, he didn't even get to make his case, and that suggested a whiff of politics.
Yep.
What else happened when that guy stepped out of the room?
Messy. Speaking of COVID, Ben, the Mexican president Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador says that he too has COVID, tested positive for the second time. I don't know if he has a good tennis game, but I guess he looked bad enough at a press conference that a reporter was like, dude, you okay? He said he thought he had the flu, and then later that day announced he had tested positive again. The first time was in January 2021. So everyone's getting it.
Yeah. One of the questions I have is, like, do we know when everybody gets it? Like, in other words, like there's this whole Ron DeSantis thing, right, where he went off the grid for a couple of weeks and came back and looked a little worse for wear. But, like, some of these leaders don't necessarily embrace transparency.
No.
Right? So we may not know who gets it. Then the other question is, what happens if, some of these people are pretty old? What happens if, you have, like, a death of a leader? I mean, AMLO's up there, I hope he pulls through for his sake. But, there's a lot that hasn't happened yet.
We got to protect our old leaders.
Yeah, we do.
Agreed.
Yeah, we'll be agreed on that point.
Someone, a head of state who is seemingly kind of embraced transparency around his health is Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
So he was hospitalized. We talked about this last week. Turns out the issue was he swallowed a shrimp without chewing it thoroughly enough. Now, I want to laugh at this. I know the listeners want to laugh. But again, he has intestinal issues because he was stabbed in the abdomen during a campaign event in 2018. So shitty person, but not funny to stab someone.
Shitty that happened.
My question for you, Ben, is, has a shrimp or any other crustacean ever tried to take you out?
No. I did have a terrible experience once swallowing a really large pit at a state dinner in Bangkok.
Oh my God!
Okay,
what kind of pit?
So we're in Thailand, and they serve this like local fruit that's kind of like felt like plum adjacent, right? But the pits are larger, and it just went wrong. I had the nurse. I would probably Ronnie Jackson,
really?
Congressman is involved.
He was
it's stuck
here,
in my
have some
throat.
amphetamines.
They gave me it was.
Did you get Heimlicked?
No, I didn't get Heimlicked. It had to kind of work work
sure,
itself
sure.
out. But that you just gave me that memory. Reminds me of the shrimp in Apocalypse Now. If you eat that shrimp, soldier, you don't have to prove your courage any other way.
I had to perform the Heimlich on the press charter on one of our Latin America trips. Remember that? One of our colleagues, I won't say his name.
Yeah.
Sitting next to me, I was dead asleep, and all of a sudden I'm getting shaken awake, and the guy's next to me kind of reaching over, and I tried to reach over and do the Heimlich, and then I had to run around back and jump on the seat behind and kind of do the Heimlich that way.
Wow.
Yeah, and I remember Ashley Tate Gilmore was she started yelling for Secret Service, it was their job to dislodge Skittles from assistant press secretary's throats.
Did that work? Yeah,
it worked, but it took
good skill to know.
It took a frighteningly long amount of time.
Yeah.
It was not cool.
It's not good.
But yeah,
fun
on foreign trips.
Yeah, the other foreign trip thing that occurred to me is Australia related, immigration related. So because it speaks to kind of the dickishness of some of their migratory policies. So we were flying into the G20 in Brisbane in 2014, and Ebola had happened, right? And they had a questionnaire that had to be filled out whether you had traveled to the continent of Africa. And if you did, you needed to get all this extra screening, presumably. Now, the thing that caught the attention, I don't think she'd mind me saying, of our then National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, is that Africa is a very large continent.
Yeah, it's sort of like U.S. plus Europe plus a whole bunch of other places combined.
And Ebola was only in very small number of West African countries.
Right.
It was basically in, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea. And this really pissed her off. And even Obama was kind of like, really? Not a good look.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
Yeah, all of Africa. So they need to, they're such friendly people, the Australians. Like, let's lighten up on the stringency of your immigration policies and visitor policies.
My main memory from the time I went to Australia with Obama was going to that little airport in Darwin where we did that marine installation, and then when we were in Brisbane, where's the capital? Canberra.
Yeah.
I remember walking into a glass table in the hotel lobby so hard that I thought I'd snap my shin in half.
Ow.
And the table slid off and hit the ground and it didn't shatter, but it made the loudest noise you could possibly make. And I looked like the biggest asshole. Like, people from behind the front desk were coming over to ask if I was okay. I kind of tried to walk it off and limp, and then I looked under my suit and I was bleeding like a monster. And, I had one suit on the trip.
Was Brian Jackson help you out there?
Yeah, no, he didn't stitch me up.
Yeah.
He probably knew I was an asshole by then. Okay, well, that's good. Stay in the Asia Pacific region. We got some updates out of North Korea, Ben. So first, North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles into the water off the East Coast last week. That is bad. Feels like it happens all the time. I don't know what to make of it anymore. Not good.
I mean, he gave some speech about how they needed to improve their capabilities, and then they fired this thing off. It feels of a piece of Kim Jong-un,
Constant. Okay, so second, according to North Korean's state news, one outlet claimed that Kim Jong-il, the former supreme leader of North Korea, father of Kim Jong-un, the current guy, actually invented the burrito. So these propagandists said that Kim Jong-il came up with the idea for wheat wraps in 2011, right before he had a heart attack and died. So I guess, some ideas are good enough to kill you. According to this other report I read, Ben, on this, the word burrito first appears in a Mexican dictionary in 1895.
I was going to say, the
Yeah, so I'm not sure about this claim.
I recall eating burritos before 2011.
That does feel pretty recent to have invented the burrito.
Yeah. I mean, the lengths to which you can invent a reality if you have total control of information and
this is a lie you could tell before the invention of the internet and not after.
Yeah.
It's clear what their perspective. It's like, it would be really funny in 1997 to just walk around and be like, I invented the pizza.
Yeah. I mean, the burrito is a very specific thing to claim to invent.
It's also you can't just call a wheat wrap a burrito.
Can we? But here's the thing. What was the meeting in which someone came up with this idea?
I don't know.
Because that meeting happened. There was a meeting where some people were like, you know what, we really got to strengthen the Kim dynasty's, whatever, Q rating. What if we said that the previous weird guy who ran this place invented something, and someone's like, I got it. What if we say he invented the burrito? Or is it Kim Jong-un likes burritos, and I don't know.
I don't know. And it was also, I think, during a period of intense famine, and there hadn't been harvest. Of all the times to say you invented the fucking burrito, that's probably not the one. I don't know, man. Whatever. Speaking of food choices, former failed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been the subject of some talk lately about his health, and was the subject of one of the strangest editorials I've ever read in my life, ever. So Pompeo did this gauzy interview with the New York Post, and he said he lost 90 pounds in 6 months by exercising and eating right. It seems like maybe he did this little PR hit because people were speculating that he got surgery or whatever. Who cares? Good for him. Good for you, Mike. For some reason, the Kansas City Star editorial board wrote an entire piece calling him a liar. The headline was...
I appreciate... What are you talking? For some reason. It's because he's a fucking asshole.
He's a fucking asshole. This is the headline. Dude, just tell the truth. Mike Pompeo lost 90 lbs, but not the way he said he did. And it quoted a bunch of bodybuilders, weight loss experts, air quotes, who said Pompeo's story was impossible, but none of them had actually talked to him. I guess the argument for writing it is what you said. He's an asshole. He's a public official. He's a liar.
He'll lie about anything.
Call him out on his lies.
He'll even lie about this.
Yeah. Maybe claiming that you can just like magically lose 90 pounds in 6 months is a bad message, is unsafe, is promoting something. I don't know. Did you read this editorial? Do we need Dr. Oz to comment?
I read it very carefully. I mean, number one, Mike Pompeo may be the only human being on the face of the earth who can lose 90 pounds and look worse on the back end of that process.
He's haunting.
He's kind of this haunting specter now, right? Like he looked better as a fat dude than he looks right now. Let's just say that, first of all. Second of all, he's so clearly lying. Like, there's not some diet of look, I like Athletic Greens, cricket sponsor, but like the idea that you're going to lose 90 pounds,
it's a lot,
by like eating a little bit less and working out is just, I don't think backed by science. Like a lot of things that Mike Pompeo doesn't believe in, climate change, etc. So it just shows that this guy's just like a brazen liar, right? Then it's like, why is the Rupert Murdoch-owned New York Post even think it's of interest to their
Why is the New York Post doing a gauzy spread on his in-house gym? They did a photo shoot in his basement.
Well, this is the thing where you also see like the Hugh Hewitts of the world, like Mike Pompeo, some presidential caliber figure. Dude has never cracked 1%, right, in any poll that I've seen. Like however much he weighs, right? I don't know what the reason is that Rupert Murdoch feels like, we better give Mike the chance to talk up his diet.
We're making fun of the burrito story, and the New York Post is over here doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a weird thing on the right, like with these, it's always dudes too, like their obsession with because if you look at Alex Jones and Seb Gorka, they're always hawking like weird supplements or weight loss things or things that make old men look like young and virile.
Yeah, a lot of snake oil.
There's a lot of like masculinity, aspiration from these guys.
My favorite are like the Alex Jones before and after shirtless pictures when he looks exactly the same, but like they tinted the photos so he's a little more tan or something, or like sprayed on some abs. Anyway, last story for today, Ben, and it's a sad one. Previously on this show, we have talked about Magawa, who is this genius little rat who was trained to sniff out landmines. This little hero was awarded a gold medal at one point for his heroism because he sniffed out over 100 mines or other explosives in Cambodia, probably saved countless lives, probably children's lives. Yeah. Sadly, he passed away this weekend at the age of 8. So I just wanted to say, thank you again, Magawa. Hopefully you are up in heaven crushing cheese with, the Ratatouille guy.
Yeah.
Master Splinter.
Hopefully he's having the soup of the Ratatouille guy.
Master Splinter from the Ninja Turtles. I don't know, any other famous rats. Mrs. Bisbee and the Rats of Nim. That was a great book.
I mean, it goes to show that, we do all these, medical experiments in rats, but the reality is, we should be putting them to work,
Yeah.
They got skills. Magawa has had a greater positive impact on the world than Mike Pompeo.
That's true. It is amazing, though. Sometimes there's so much money put into technology to find weapons or mines or radar or this or that, and there's just, some amazing animal could just find it.
8 years must be a pretty good run for a rat.
It's a good run for a rat.
Yeah, we'll pour one out.
I mean, you grew up in New York City. You probably have more experience.
I mean, you stick your head down a subway tunnel. Look, some of those guys look like they've been there for 80 years. They got turf over there.
We had a rat issue at my old place in L.A.
I've had
rental,
rat issues
and
in some of my residences. It's not pleasant.
It was tough.
Yeah, it's tough.
It was tough.
Yeah.
Well, Magawa's special
Magawa
little guy.
would make an exception for him.
All the cheese to you. All the cheese in heaven.
The Ratatouille guy up there.
To Magawa. Thanks to everyone who made it to the outro. Thanks to Magawa, the special rat. Thanks to Mike Pompeo. Thanks to burritos everywhere. Anything
Thanks
else?
to the person who actually invented the burrito.
Yeah.
That was a great man or woman.
That was a hell of a move.
Maybe.
Or for a very special Secretary of State. Stay safe out there, everybody. I hope Djokovic, if you're listening, come on the show.
Same thing with Rafa Nadal.
Yeah, Nadal. That would be a much cooler one. All right. Well, you got anything else?
That's all I got.
All right. Talk to you guys next week.